All right, so welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at two cases that I think really captivated the world,
Yeah.
Gabby Petito and George Floyd.
Mhm.
And we're looking at them through the lens of their Spanish Wikipedia entries.
That's right. Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people already know these cases, but we're going beyond just the headlines, right?
Exactly.
Trying to dig into what these cases reveal about media attention,
Yeah.
societal biases, the justice system, all that kind of stuff.
It's interesting how both of these cases were so impactful,
Right.
but they really played out so differently in the public eye. And I think that's what we're going to explore today.
Absolutely.
Looking at those contrasting narratives and maybe finding some clues in how Spanish language media presented them.
Yeah, that's a great
See
point.
some really interesting insights there.
So let's start with Gabby Petito.
Okay.
Now, this story, it took social media by storm.
It did.
And it's a tragic story, but she was, 22 years old, living that van life, that aspirational van life.
A dream, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
Yeah, with her fiance, Brian Laundrie. They were on this cross-country adventure, but it took a very, very dark turn.
Yeah.
And the media coverage was just so intense. It almost became a story in itself.
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic example of what we call missing white woman syndrome.
Right.
Where certain cases, they just get so much more attention.
Yeah.
Think about it. How many missing persons cases can you actually remember off the top of your head?
Not many.
Chances are they fit a specific profile, and that's a problem in itself.
Yeah, I think Gabby's case was really amplified by that sort of picture-perfect Instagram life.
Oh, for sure.
The contrast between those sunny travel photos
Right.
and then the reality of her disappearance, it was stark.
Totally.
And even in the Spanish Wikipedia article, it consistently uses her full name, Gabrielle Venora Petito. It makes you wonder if that's like a cultural approach, maybe.
Right.
More formal, respectful, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because even these small differences in language, they can reveal a lot about societal views on victims.
Yeah.
It really does make you think.
It does. Like, would the coverage have been the same if those elements weren't there? It's a question worth asking.
Absolutely.
And then there's this incident in Moab, Utah.
Right.
Where police were called after someone reported seeing Gabby hitting Brian.
Mm-hmm.
But get this, the police report actually lists her as the suspect.
It's a detail that's often overlooked,
It is.
especially given how the media portrayed Gabby as the victim.
Right.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It challenges those assumptions, forces us to think about the complexities of domestic disputes where the lines can get very blurred.
Yeah. The body cam footage from that incident is, it's really unsettling.
It is.
You see Gabby and she's clearly distraught.
Yeah.
But Brian he seems much calmer. Right. He didn't claim that she was the aggressor.
It's chilling to watch knowing how it all ended.
Right.
Makes you think, what if things had been different? What
Yeah.
if different actions had been taken?
Yeah. But in the end, the police separated them for the night, no charges filed,
Right.
and they continued on their trip.
It's a tough one. It highlights the challenges law enforcement faces in those situations.
Oh.
What seems like a minor argument 1 minute
Right.
can escalate so quickly.
Exactly.
And the signs of abuse aren't always clear-cut.
And from there, the timeline just gets darker.
Yeah.
Late August, communication with her family stops.
Right.
Brian returns to Florida alone, hires a lawyer, goes completely silent,
Mm.
and then the news hits, Gabby's body's found in Wyoming.
Terrible.
Cause of death, homicide by strangulation.
The public reaction was huge, wasn't it?
Oh, intense.
Immediate, intense.
Yeah.
Online sleuths everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
The media, just a frenzy. And Gabby's family just pleading for Brian to cooperate.
Yeah.
It really gripped the nation. That mix of mystery, tragedy, and then the constant news coverage. It was just a lot.
Yeah. And then Brian's story, well, it ends tragically too.
Right.
He disappears. His remains are found in Florida, ruled a suicide by gunshot.
Yeah. A tragic end to a story full of unanswered questions. We'll never know for sure what happened between them on that trip.
We won't.
What led to that final fatal confrontation. It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even with all the media attention in the world, sometimes the truth remains hidden.
Absolutely.
Makes you think about how much public perception is shaped by the information we have access to, which might not be the whole picture.
Right. And that's something that we're going to see play out in a different way when we talk about George Floyd.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a case that sparked a global movement for racial justice. And his death, so different from Gabby's, it really exposes the deep-rooted issues of racism and police brutality that are still so present in our society.
And it's so important to recognize that the media response to these two cases was just, I mean, it was night and day.
Oh, yeah.
Gabby's disappearance, I mean, it dominated headlines for weeks.
For weeks.
But the initial coverage of George Floyd's death, it was more subdued,
It was.
almost routine.
Almost like another day.
Yeah, despite the horrifying nature of what happened.
It's like we've become desensitized to these stories of black men dying at the hands of police, which is a terrible thing to admit, but it's true.
It is. It's like it took the power of that bystander video,
Right.
that agonizing 8 minutes, to really capture the world's attention.
That's a powerful statement about how the media works, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how narratives are shaped by biases, what stories are told, how they're framed, who's the victim, who's the perpetrator. It all has consequences.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that the Spanish Wikipedia article on George Floyd, it delves a little deeper into his background than some of the initial English language coverage did,
Mm.
even including details about his past criminal record.
Makes you think about the editorial choices, right?
Right.
How those choices shape our understanding of events, of the people involved.
Exactly. Even seemingly objective sources like Wikipedia, they're still influenced by cultural perspectives and editorial decisions.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And those seemingly small details can reveal a lot about the underlying assumptions and biases that are in play. It's really fascinating, to see how those things shape how we interpret information.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. So let's dig into what happened, what led to George Floyd's death. He was 46 years old, a black man living in Minneapolis, facing economic hardship like so many were due to the pandemic.
Right.
And he gets arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill. I mean, it seems like such a minor offense.
It does, but it's a perfect example of how even the smallest event can become a tragedy,
Yeah.
especially with the systems we have in place.
It is.
The way Officer Chauvin restrained him, Floyd's desperate pleas, "I can't breathe," the people around begging for his life, all caught on that video. It's hard to watch, but it's something we have to confront. That's the reality.
It is. And it's a stark reminder that for many people, especially people of color, interactions with law enforcement can be incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely.
But that $20 bill becomes the symbol of how quickly things can escalate
Yeah,
from routine to life or death.
exactly. And it forces us to confront this issue of systemic racism,
Mm.
especially within law enforcement.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just holding individual officers accountable. We have to address the underlying systems that enable these tragedies,
Right.
a bigger problem.
And the aftermath of George Floyd's death, I mean, it was huge, right?
Oh, huge.
Protests erupted globally. The Black Lives Matter movement gained so much momentum.
Yeah.
Calls for police reform. It really showed a society struggling with its own deep-seated problems.
It did. A real watershed moment, exposing those divisions in our society. And then there were the different autopsy findings, remember?
Right, right.
That added fuel to the fire.
It did.
The initial report from Hennepin County, it suggested Floyd's death wasn't directly caused by asphyxiation,
Right.
but rather by underlying health conditions and possible drug use.
Right. And a lot of people saw that initial report as like an attempt to downplay the officer's role in his death.
I can see why. It felt like an attempt to deflect blame, to protect the system.
Yeah.
But then the private autopsy, the one commissioned by Floyd's family, that had a different conclusion. Mechanical asphyxia, they said, due to that sustained pressure on his neck and back.
It's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights the distrust that a lot of communities, especially communities of color, have towards these official investigations.
I understand that distrust, though.
Right,
It's rooted in a long history of systemic racism,
right.
a justice system that so often fails people of color. We see it again and again.
It's a pattern, and it's a problem.
It is a big one.
Then there were the charges against the officers involved.
Right.
Derek Chauvin, the officer who knelt on Floyd's neck for over 8 minutes,
Yeah.
he was convicted of murder.
It was huge.
It
A
was.
landmark moment.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so rare to see an officer held accountable for the death of a black man.
and he was sentenced to over 22 years in prison.
I think a lot of people felt like that was a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
Like finally, things are changing.
Yeah.
That the old ways, They just weren't acceptable anymore.
And the other officers involved, they received prison sentences, too.
Yeah, for aiding and abetting.
Right.
It was a recognition that they had a responsibility to intervene.
To protect George Floyd.
Absolutely.
And those convictions, I mean, they were a victory for the Floyd family,
Of course.
for the millions who marched and protested in his name. But they don't erase the pain and the trauma
No.
that his loved ones experienced.
Of course not.
And they don't address those systemic issues that led to this tragedy in the first place.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that even though these convictions were significant, they're just one step.
Yeah.
One step on a very long road toward justice.
And they don't guarantee that something like this won't happen again.
Sadly not.
Yeah.
The Spanish Wikipedia article also talks about the global impact of Floyd's death.
Yeah, I noticed that.
There was condemnation from world leaders,
Right.
protests all over the world, people standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, it really shows that the fight for racial justice goes beyond borders. It's a global issue.
Absolutely. It's a human issue.
So, stepping back a bit.
Yeah.
What can we learn by looking at Gabby Petito and George Floyd's cases together?
That's a great question.
What can these two cases, these seemingly disparate cases,
Right.
reveal about the media, societal biases,
Yeah.
even the systems that are meant to protect us?
It's fascinating, isn't it? On the surface, these cases seem worlds apart.
Yeah, they do.
You have a young white woman on a van life adventure,
Right?
and a black man caught in a routine police encounter.
Just going about his day.
Exactly. But if we look deeper, there are some really thought-provoking parallels and contrasts.
Definitely. I mean, even the victims themselves tell a story, right?
Yeah.
Gabby Petito, she was young, attractive.
Right?
She fit that mold of what we've come to expect from media darlings.
Yeah.
Her story, amplified by social media, it resonated with a lot of people, especially young women who could really see themselves in her.
Yeah, absolutely.
George Floyd, though, he was initially presented differently. Some media outlets focusing on his past criminal record rather than his humanity.
That's a really important point. Those portrayals, they reflect the biases we have about victims.
Yeah.
How we assign value to their lives.
It's disturbing, really.
It is. It makes you ask some uncomfortable questions, like whose stories do we prioritize?
Yeah. Whose pain do we recognize? Whose lives do we actually consider worthy of mourning? It's a lot to think about.
And the media coverage itself, that reflects these biases too, right?
For sure. I mean, Gabby Petito's case, it was like this constant churn.
Yeah.
24-hour news cycle. Online sleuths digging into every detail.
Every single one.
That allure of a mystery unfolding in real time. It had all the elements of a captivating true crime drama.
Right.
George Floyd's death, at least at first, it didn't get that same level of attention.
It didn't.
It was just another black man killed by police. A tragically familiar story that hadn't broken through the noise yet.
It's so sad to say that.
It is, but it's the truth. The contrast in coverage is striking.
Yeah.
It took that video of George Floyd dying, that incredibly disturbing footage, for the world to really pay attention.
To make it impossible to ignore.
Exactly. It's like certain narratives are overlooked until they reach a tipping point.
Yeah. Until the outrage becomes so big, it can't be ignored any longer.
And it's like society had become desensitized to stories of black men dying at the hands of police.
Yeah.
It's a painful truth, but it's something we have to acknowledge.
We do. And then there's the issue of police brutality.
Right.
A thread that runs through both cases, even though they're so different.
In very different ways, yeah.
In Gabby Petito's case, we see this missed opportunity for intervention.
Right.
A failure to recognize the potential for domestic abuse.
Right.
A tragic escalation that leads to her death.
Right.
But with George Floyd, it's the raw, brutal use of force.
Yeah.
A blatant disregard for human life.
It's almost like a sense of impunity.
Right. Like they knew they could get away with it.
Yeah.
It's disturbing.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I like that.
Both cases exposing the systemic failures that allow violence to flourish.
Exactly.
One revealing those subtle ways bias can influence outcomes.
Right.
The other just laying bare the brutal consequences of those biases.
When they manifest in law enforcement, it's a whole different level of terrifying.
And the legal outcomes, too. I mean, they highlight those deep inequalities in the justice system.
Absolutely. Gabby Petito's killer, Brian Laundrie, he avoided accountability.
Right, by taking his own life.
Exactly. But Derek Chauvin, after a very public trial, he was held responsible.
Yeah, for George Floyd's murder.
It's a stark reminder that justice isn't always served.
Especially for marginalized communities.
Yeah. And even when accountability is achieved, it doesn't erase the pain.
The trauma.
It doesn't guarantee that it won't happen again.
No, it doesn't. I think these cases, when you consider them together, they force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our society.
They do.
They challenge us to look at our own biases,
Absolutely.
to question the narratives that we're consuming,
Right.
and to demand better from the systems that are supposed to protect us.
We can't just sit back and accept this as the norm.
We can't. So what can we take away from all of this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
From this deep dive into media attention, societal biases,
Yeah.
the justice system, what does it all mean for us?
What does it mean for how we understand the world and our place in it?
It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think it's a call to action.
Okay, I like that.
A call to be more critical of the information we're given.
Right.
To challenge those narratives. To demand accountability from those in power. We have to do better.
These cases aren't just isolated incidents.
No.
They're symptoms of a much bigger problem,
Yeah.
a societal illness that we need to work together to heal.
Absolutely. It's about understanding how everything is connected.
Right.
How media narratives shape our perceptions. How our own biases can perpetuate these systems of inequality.
It's about having those difficult conversations, even when they're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
It's about amplifying marginalized voices,
Yeah.
challenging racist narratives,
Absolutely.
holding those in power accountable.
We have to create a more just and equitable world.
And it's not just about changing laws.
No.
It's about changing hearts and minds.
It's about seeing each other as human beings.
Recognizing the humanity in every individual, no matter their race.
Yeah.
Socioeconomic status, past mistakes.
We're all in this together.
And understanding that true justice requires a fundamental shift in how we view and treat each other.
It's a big task,
It is.
but it's one we have to take on.
Social media played a huge role in both of these cases, too.
It did. Gabby Petito's story was really amplified by that online community.
Right.
And the video of George Floyd's death sparked global outrage.
Demands for justice.
It's a reminder of the power social media has.
It's a double-edged sword, though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be used for good, to amplify those voices that need to be heard,
Right.
to hold those in power accountable.
But it can also be used to spread misinformation.
Yeah.
Harmful stereotypes.
It's up to us to be careful.
Be critical thinkers.
Right.
And to use these platforms responsibly.
We have to recognize their limitations, too.
And we can't forget about the need for continued dialogue and action on police reform.
Absolutely not. We need to rethink what public safety means.
Yeah.
Invest in communities.
Right.
Address those root causes of crime.
Create systems that prioritize de-escalation.
Yeah.
Accountability, community engagement. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every single human being.
That's the goal.
And working towards a world where tragedies like these are less likely to occur.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive,
We have,
but there's always more to learn.
always. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
What role can you play in addressing these systemic inequalities?
Yeah, it's a good one.
What actions can you take,
Individually,
and collectively?
to create a more just and equitable world. What can you do?
Yeah, it makes you think, right? It challenges us to actually do something, to move beyond just being aware of these issues.
To take action. Yeah, it's not about having all the answers.
Right.
It's about being willing to have those tough conversations, the ones that make us uncomfortable.
Right.
And to challenge our own biases.
Absolutely.
And to commit to creating a more just world.
Yeah,
It's a process.
it is. And both of these cases, they really show how powerful individual stories can be
You do.
in sparking those larger conversations.
Right, about the systems that need to change.
Gabby Petito's case, fueled by social media,
Mm-hmm.
it highlighted those disparities in how missing persons cases are treated
Yeah.
and how some victims just get more attention.
Right, it's not fair.
It's not. And then George Floyd's death, captured on that video.
So awful.
I know, but it ignited a global movement
It did.
for racial justice, police reform.
Real turning point.
It was. Their stories, so different.
Right.
They converged on this shared truth.
Yeah.
The need for more awareness.
More empathy?
Definitely, and action. We've seen how those media narratives shape how we see things,
Right.
how societal biases influence what happens, and just how deeply ingrained these systems of inequality really are.
It's disheartening.
It is, but it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this.
It is.
But we have to remember that each of us can play a part in making things better.
It can.
It starts with educating ourselves.
Right. Learning as much as we can.
Looking at our own biases.
Being honest with ourselves about those.
Yeah, and having open, honest conversations.
Even if they're difficult, we have to talk about these issues.
We do, and it's not just about talking, it's about the choices we make every day.
Yeah, the things we do.
The media we consume.
Right. What we choose to watch, read, listen to.
The conversations we have.
Who we talk to, what we talk about.
The actions we take.
Big or small, they all matter.
It's about using our voices.
Yeah.
To amplify those marginalized voices.
Lift them up.
To challenge injustice.
Absolutely.
To hold those in power accountable.
We have a responsibility to do that.
We do. And we have to remember, change doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't. It's a long process.
It is. And it can be difficult.
But every step we take towards a more just world, it matters.
It does. Whether it's supporting those organizations fighting for social justice,
Right.
talking to our friends and family about these issues,
Right.
or just being more aware of our own biases.
Every little bit helps.
So I want you to think about what you've learned.
Okay.
Consider how you can apply it to your own life.
What can you do differently?
What actions will you take?
What changes can you make?
What conversations will you start?
Think about it.
How will you help build a world where tragedies like these are less likely to happen?
That's the goal, right?
It is.
A better world for everyone.
Well, it's been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
And thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
But action is what really transforms the world.
So let's get to work.
Keep learning, keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep pushing for change. Until next time.